I couldn't hear you.
Oh, we're about to go live on YouTube, and then Brandy will be able to start in just a moment here.
Oh, okay. About to go live on YouTube, and then Brandy will start. And you can turn it down just a little, Jennifer, but thank you. That helps. Yeah. Oh, I can't hear him now, but I mean, I'm sure I will when he talks.
Can you say, are we good to go?
Are we good to go, Matt?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I would like to acknowledge the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people on which we are meeting today. We're here to dedicate this public artwork named Suffrage Quilt. It was created to honor the lives of the women who fought for equal rights and the women of today who are still continuing this fight. The piece begins with the Indigenous women that inspired the women's suffrage movement and follows women's activism through the ensuing decades, past the ratification of the 19th Amendment. It is left unfinished at the end to symbolize the work that still needs to be done. The history of women's suffrage encompasses about a century worth of women's activism. Boise women played a part in this complex social movement that upended traditional notions of women's role in society. It was a major civil rights victory for the women of the United States, but came with losses under the name of political expediency. In Idaho, an amendment to the state constitution secured women's right to vote in 1896. The effort had started 25 years earlier when the first equal suffrage bill was debated by the Idaho Territorial Legislature. It failed because of an 11-11 tie. Efforts continued, but the next suffrage bill was not submitted until 14 years later. It was defeated again, as were efforts in 1887, 1889, and 1893. It wasn't until 1895 that the Idaho Equal Suffrage Association formed as an auxiliary of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. This led to a cascading effect of suffrage associations forming at the local level across the state, including our own Boise Equal Suffrage Association. The women created a network across Idaho to advocate for an amendment to the Idaho State Constitution, and they engaged in a short but intense campaign to garner support. They went door to door, targeted local newspapers to write editorials on suffrage, held lectures with local and national women, and even asked pastors and other religious representatives to do sermons in favor of suffrage. When it came to the day of the vote, the Boise group of women set up outside polling places with sandwiches to remind voters to remember the women. And when the votes were counted, success, the women had over 12,000 votes for and just over 6,000 against. Almost immediately, the State Board of Canvassers declared the amendment defeated because over a third of the total number of voters had not voted on the amendment. They hadn't even bothered to vote. The board said the amendment needed over 14,000 votes in order to pass. The suffragists fought back to make sure their win wasn't taken away from them and took the issue to the Idaho Supreme Court. In Kate Green versus State Board of Canvassers, the court ruled that the amendment had passed. Kate Green was one of our own, a member of the Boise Equal Suffrage Association. And after this success, Idaho women continued to support an amendment to the United States Constitution that would enfranchise women nationwide. The 19th Amendment, which guarantees the right to vote regardless of sex, was finally passed on August 26, 1920, exactly 100 years ago today. It was a major success, but not a final victory. The fight continued for Indigenous, Asian, and Black and Brown women, who were all left out of the main suffrage movement because of racism. They continued to carry the torch for equal representation with the passages of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, the Magnuson Act of 1943, and the Voting Rights of 1965. And yet there are still real barriers for women to access complete equal rights. The fight continues today to secure equal rights under the law, such as with efforts to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, ensuring equal pay for equal work and other workplace securities, and even childcare, a role routinely relegated to women. It is my hope, after studying this history and endeavoring to find the voices of diverse local women, that we can take the lessons learned and make further strides for women, including increasing the number of women holding political office. I'd now like to hand our time over to Boise's first elected woman mayor, Mayor McLean.
Thanks, Brandy. Hi, everybody. I am so honored to be here today to help dedicate this new art installation, The Suffrage Quilt by Stephanie Inman. And as Brandy said, it really tells the story of where we've come, but that we still have so far to go. Today's event, this virtual dedication, because we can't be in person, and much of the virtual programming we've had this year was designed to honor the history that Brandy so well laid out, both here within our state and city, and then of course nationally, to honor that today is Women's Equality Day and the day the 19th Amendment was ratified, but to recognize that ratification came by walking away from some women of color, Indigenous women, others, to make it possible to sign the first one. And I thought I'd share, a little story about voting too before I'm passing this on. I remember the first time I went to vote with my mom, 1980. I was in kindergarten, and for some reason it's always stuck with me. I remember like clearly what I was wearing. I remember the signs that I passed, because in Houston you could have signs at the polls. And in my head they feel so big, but it's because I was so tiny. I was in kindergarten. But remember walking up and casting that vote with her. And then, having my grandmother talk so often about how important it was to be engaged civically, to vote, to know your elected officials, to stand up for what you care about. And then recognizing my great grandmother was alive well before she could vote, and it came after. And through the stories of women and throughout our history, we know how much they contributed to our communities. Just like here in Idaho, we must be proud of the fact that the conversation started so much earlier than in other places, while recognizing that we did walk away from people in order to sign ultimately the 19th Amendment. And last January, while we could still travel, I visited one of those exhibits in DC at the Smithsonian and read the letters of women that were making decisions to really sacrifice the inclusion of everyone for what they saw as progress. And understanding that we did that, recognizing that because of that we had so much more work to do, is so important. And this quilt, designed by Stephanie, honors that we have so much further to go with that stitch still undone. And I remain committed to ensuring that as we build a community for everyone, we also take the steps that we must to protect our right to vote. That's so incredibly special, that for some of us have only had it for 100 years. For others, we've had it less. And the attempts to make it more difficult to vote is so against what we stand for as a country and a community. When we talk about government by the people, for the people, one person, one vote, we have to stay vigilant in protecting that right that we hold so dear. So as we acknowledge the anniversary today of the 19th Amendment, we light City Hall tonight. I pledge to you that there is still much to do in partnership and common cause with our residents to move us forward, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here, the honor that comes with being in this position, and the responsibility, of course, that comes alongside that for all women and all residents in our community as we seek to create a more inclusive community for everyone here in Boise. Take care, everybody. I want to pass this off to Council President Elaine Clegg. And again, just thanks so much for being a part of this virtual dedication. And Stephanie, thanks for sharing your work with us here at the city.
Thank you, Mayor McLean. I hope you can all hear me well. I am out at Gowan Field, actually representing Mayor McLean out here. So I'll be leaving as soon as I'm done. It's a little bit noisy, as airfields often are. So I apologize for that, but this was the quiet corner they found for me. I am so excited to be part of this. Women's suffrage has been an important part of my life, my entire life. My grandmother moved to Idaho in the early 1910s. Our family started moving here in 1915. All of the women and children came in 1918. She'd been part of the suffrage movement in Minnesota and had been unsuccessful in Minnesota getting any right to vote, and was so excited when she came to Idaho that she could sign up to be a poll worker, let alone that she could go and vote. And she did that for the rest of her life as long as she was able. It was a very, very important thing for her. So my first experience at a polling place was actually going with my mother to the polling place where my grandmother was working and talking to her and watching the vote and watching what was happening and learning how important it was. And have voted in every election that I have known about. I think I probably missed one or two here and there, but I've voted my entire life. On my father's side of the family, a very working class family, voting was also very important. They were also very excited about the American experiment, if you were, but weren't quite as empowered and didn't feel really part of it, I don't think. I had an aunt who was active in my very first campaign for city council. And I remember so clearly the night of the election, she wasn't able to be at the party. So I called her and I said, "How are you doing? We're so excited." And she just started sobbing. She just sobbed and sobbed. And I finally asked her, what's wrong? And she said, "I never believed that someone from my family, especially a woman, could be elected to anything." And it was so meaningful to me, and it still is. But it's, as everyone has pointed out, it points out that the work is undone. There are still people in this country who feel like my aunt, who feel like they can't imagine anyone in their family running for elected office and winning that elected office. There are still people in this country who don't have the right to exercise their vote freely because there are barriers in their way. And to me, what's important about this celebration and this year is being able to recognize that, and recognize that as much as has come before and as much as we honor the work that's come before, we need to dedicate ourselves to what is yet to come. And I'm more than willing to do that, very excited to do that, and very excited that we have such a wonderful, beautiful artwork that's so representative of the quilt of that American story, and yet recognizes that the work is yet undone and we have more stitches to stitch. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Councilmember Lisa Sanchez. And as I said, I'm going to have to leave here, but thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do this.
Thank you, Council President Clegg. Thank you, Mayor McLean. I am particularly moved to be a part of today's dedication of Suffrage Quilt. As has been mentioned by my colleagues on City Council and our mayor, a big part of this celebration, of this acknowledgement, is the work that still needs to be done. And so for myself, I am very pleased and honored to be the first Latina to seek a seat on the Boise City Council, and so incredibly grateful to the people of Boise, Idaho, who chose me to have that seat 2. And further, I love being the liaison from City Council to the Arts and History Commission, where so much important work is done. There are some people who undervalue the arts. I am not one of those people. I believe that a lot of the possibilities in our society to become better, to become the promise of our forefathers and foremothers, comes through the arts. It's where we have individuals who imagine the world as it could and should be. It begins there. And so I am so grateful to artist Stephanie Inman, who created Suffrage Quilt, for being so careful in taking in input about what should be included in this piece of art. And one of the items in this piece of art that I am just particularly grateful for is the inclusion of Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta is 90 years old. She is one of the co-founders of the United Farm Workers Union. But not only that, again, at 90 years old, she was born 10 years after women earned the right to vote here in this country. But as a Mexican American, she herself would not have that right to vote till much later in history. And so it's particularly poignant that she would be included in this piece of art, because she has fought diligently on behalf of women, on behalf of so many marginalized communities, to have access to the resources provided by our government, primarily through voting. I have had the honor of meeting Dolores, so to see her be part of our Boise public art is particularly touching. I very much appreciate the work that our Arts and History Commission does to be inclusive, to really move forward our work, not just in providing beautiful pieces of art, whether it's public pieces like Suffrage Quilt, but also performance, bringing in speakers as part of our Fettuccine Forum. They do so much to make sure that we are being inclusive of every voice in our community. And that is certainly represented in Suffrage Quilt. So just like our mayor and just like Council President Clegg, I would also like to take a moment to honor my family for the sacrifices they made so that I could be a part of Boise, Idaho's history of women in politics. I recently shared with a friend, you know, there are things that we don't acknowledge our family sacrificing for us until much later. And in my case, the reason I didn't recognize it as a sacrifice is because my family never viewed it as that. You know, we talk a lot about housing here in Boise and how it is at a premium. And I recently realized that when I was growing up, when I was a teenager in high school, my mother, my younger brother, and my grandmother all slept in one bedroom so that I could have my own room. And it was so that I could study, so that I could have my own space to study. And I shared this story with a friend of mine who's also Mexican American as we sat on the steps of the Boise City Hall. And I said, I certainly I don't believe for 1 minute that my mom and my brother and my grandmother thought that I would be a member of the Boise City Council. But they made those sacrifices with the hopes that I would do something with that sacrifice. And so every time I speak, every time I bring about, I point something out, either during a city council meeting or through social media, it is with that sacrifice in mind that it is important that we use our voice, because we are living history. We are making history right now. And we want our descendants to be proud of us, to be proud of the sacrifice we're making, as we are proud of those men and women who sacrificed so that we could be here doing what we do. And so with that, I would like to hand it over to our wonderful artist, Stephanie Inman, the creator of Suffrage Quilt.
Stephanie, you're muted.
Oh, okay, there, how's that? I loved taking the idea of a traditional women's art form, a quilt, and making it large, graphic, and appear unfinished to tell the story of women's suffrage. Panels were cut out of aluminum, powder coated in bold colors, and placed at different layers like a crazy quilt. Yet the quilt is meant to look unfinished. These unfinished parts with raw aluminum visually explain that the fight for voting rights didn't end 100 years ago. People of color and people in certain religious groups continued to struggle for their right to vote, and voter suppression continues today. Historian Brandy Burns is an amazing asset to Boise. She and I worked with Boise Arts and History staff and various community members to identify symbols and historical markers you could find behind me in Suffrage quilts. To mark this moment in history, some of the key symbols are Boise and Idaho specific, and some are national symbols. I'm grateful for the keen eye to detail that so many Boise Arts and History staff have, especially Brandy, Jennifer, Amy, Katina, Katie, and Janessa, who worked with me on the timeline to get the details just right. Arts and cultural advocates like Terry Shoresman, Carl Leclerc, and Karen Bubb should also be thanked, along with the Arts and History Commission. Thank you to Councilwoman Lisa Sanchez for your valuable input to this project. Thank you to Mayor McLean and to all of City Council for your support of public art that contributes to the culture of our wonderful home. Last and definitely not least, a huge debt of gratitude goes to the team at Trademark Design and Fabrication. John Yarnell and Dan Beyer are true professionals who worked with me to make this installation the best it could possibly be and in budget. And I want to say thank you to them for being so awesome. I am so proud of this piece, and I hope it's one that brightens our little place on earth here in Boise, Idaho. It has been my pleasure to work on it.
Thank you, everyone. I think that is the end of our remarks, and we appreciate you joining us for this virtual public art dedication, and we hope that we can all come together soon in the future safely and in person again, and have a wonderful Wednesday.
Thank you all so much.